Hello, welcome to my channel. The video of today, this video is about research methods. So we're going to see what are research methods, what is the rationale of these research methods, and how can we use them in projects like undergrad dissertations, master's dissertations, and the initial steps on a PhD. The concepts we use here, the information, the research methods we're going to be using here is pretty much in the information systems domain. So we're going to be looking within this context, but that doesn't mean that what we see here, the concept we use here, cannot be applied to any other domain. It's primarily aimed to undergrad students, master's students, and first-year PhD students, but as well, doesn't mean that anyone who wants to know more about this area, that's also useful for them. The information I use in this video is pretty much my judgment about some of the areas we're going to be looking at. But in order to provide you with where my judgment is coming from, I'm going to leave you at the end of this video some references so you can make your own judgment. Okay, let's get on with it. Philosophy and research. We normally tend to separate sciences from philosophy, but in fact these two domains are intrinsically related, and even more when it comes to research methods. To understand this relationship, let's look first at the definition of paradigm, which is a philosophical argument as explained in the next video by Stephen Covey.
A paradigm comes from the Greek root paradigma. It basically means a pattern, a model, a representation, something that stands for something else. It comes from the mental image you have in your mind of the way things are out there. And the images we carry in our heads of the way things are, of reality, come basically from our own backgrounds, our own experiences. All of us think we see the world as it is. In fact, we see the world as we are. We project onto the outside world, our environment, people we associate with, including how we see ourselves. We project out of our own conditioning experiences, our background, a certain representation, a certain model, a certain set of expectations, a certain assumption on that reality out there. And we think that's the way it is. I might describe myself or you or a situation as if I am describing it as it is. In fact, I am describing myself, that is, my perceptions, my frame of reference, my worldview, my value system, my autobiography. And I'm projecting it upon the outside.
The previous definition refers to a paradigm in general. Now let's take a look at how paradigm is defined in the academic domain. Mingers defines a paradigm as a construct that specifies a general set of philosophical assumptions covering the ontology, what is assumed to exist, epistemology, the nature of the valid knowledge, ethics or axiology, what is considered to be right, and a methodology. As you can see, a methodology is part of a research paradigm. Now remember that a paradigm is based on our perceptions of the world. But our perceptions are always correct?
No, the answer is no. Our perceptions are not always correct. Let's work with a simple example. We have this figure in front of us. This figure has two blocks, the block in the top and the block in the bottom. They look like they have different colors, right? They look that the color in the top is darker than the color in the bottom. But if I cover the rest of the figure, the surroundings of the figure, you will notice that the colors are the same. Okay? So we have the same color in both figures, but when we take it out, it looks different. This is an optical illusion that the way this happens is because our brains are trained to see these figures in a particular way, so therefore they interpret it in a way that goes into our brains, even though in reality we have the same color. So what can we learn from this example? Well, what we can learn from this example is that not our observations are not always correct. Okay, So if our observations are not always correct, we need to find ways to find mechanisms in which we ensure that our observations are as close as possible to the real world, if there is something that we can call like that. So this is when research methods come into place.
In the information system domain, we have two main paradigms, the scientific and the interpretivist. There are other paradigms that use a combination of either of these two. However, the scientific and the interpretivist are the most predominant ones. So let's take a look at each of them closer. To be called scientific, a method of inquiry must be based on gathering empirical and measurable evidence subject to specific principles of reasoning. The Oxford English Dictionary defines scientific method as a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consistent in systematic observation, measurement, experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. On the other hand, we have qualitative research, which is related to social sciences. Social science is the field of study concerned with society and human behaviors. Social science is commonly used as an umbrella term to refer a plurality of fields outside the natural science. For example, we find in the social science anthropology, archaeology, criminology, economics, history, linguistics, communication studies, and in general, everything that has to do with human behavior, such as sociology, geography, law, and psychology. Qualitative researchers aim to gather in-depth understanding of the human behavior and the reasons that govern such behavior. The qualitative method investigates the why and the how of decision making, not just the what, the where, and the when. These two main paradigms, each of them have different research methods to study the phenomena. As you can see in the information system domain, we can use either methods that belong to the natural sciences or methods that belong to the social sciences. But which is better to study information system?
There's only one way to find out.
I wish we could answer it that way. Well, coming back to the question of which of these paradigms is better for information systems, this can be a difficult question if we consider that in information systems we have technology, which can be studied with scientific methods, but also we have people using the technology, in which case can be studied with social science methods. We have to remember, however, that those methods, scientific or interpretivist, are based on paradigms, which means that they are positions based on the stance and belief of the researchers. Hence, either method could be considered correct as long as the methods are applied correctly and rigorously. Research methods are precisely here to help us to answer this question by providing the means and rigor to ensure our observations of the phenomena we're studying are as close as possible to reality. As a researcher, we need to take a stand on our preferred paradigm and then look at the possible methods within that paradigm that can we use to study the phenomena. For example, we cannot say we are from the scientific position and use qualitative methods to obtain and analyze data. That would be incorrect. Similarly, we cannot say that we are from the qualitative standing, qualitative paradigm, and use scientific methods. Now, if you remember, I told you that in the information system domain, we have a bit of both sides. So therefore, using methods from both areas is not incorrect, as long as you justify correctly why you are using those methods in the phenomena you are studying. Well, so far we have seen the paradigms we have in the information system domain to study information systems. We have the scientific paradigm and we have the interpretive paradigm. So now what we need to see is how research methods come into place, and as we discussed before, each paradigm will have the specific sets of methods that are used to study the phenomena based on the paradigm. As we said before, for example, if I decide to be in the scientific paradigm, that means that I believe the position of the scientific community, and therefore I will try to use scientific methods to study the phenomena I want to study. In the same way, if I select the interpretive paradigm, That means that the phenomena I want to study in information systems has characteristics that fits to this paradigm, and therefore I will use methods that are used in this domain, in the interpretive domain, to study that. And as I said before, we also can use a combination of them. So I can say that the phenomenon I'm studying, some sections of it can be done by the scientific paradigm with scientific methods, and the other section can be done by interpretive methods, and then do a triangulation of the results. Anyway, the point here is that we discussed this bit, we discussed the main concepts of paradigms, so now we will move into explaining what are the research methods we have and how do we have them. So we have some concepts we have to explain. We will explain which are research methods or research methodologies, which is some concept that sometimes is confusing for the students. And then we also will look at which are the techniques, the way I call it techniques, that we have within those methods to study the phenomena. So we're going to get more into the practical bits of it. Okay, so let's continue with the conversation. To understand what is research methods or methodologies, we need to go and look at the definitions. However, in the definition itself, we start with some problems. And I'm going to use the example of John Mingers, the definitions of John Mingers, to tell you what is the problem. First, I mean, if you look at the definition of research methods, John Mingers argued that is a well-defined sequences of operations that, if carried out proficiently, yield predictable results. That's what he defines as a method. And then says, like, well, this is like when we conduct particular activities such as administering and analyzing a survey or conducting control experiments. All right. Then we move into the methodology. And John Mingers, in another paper, also says that a methodology is a structural set of guidelines of activities to assist in generating valid and reliable results. And then argues that it consists of methods, various methods or techniques that you can use or not depending on your research. Now, the problem we have here is that the difference between methods and methodology is really, really very, very small, in the sense that one set is more general and less prescriptive, but if you analyze the definition, and if you look at the green words that I have highlighted for you, you will see that there are not much differences. We have a sequence of operations in the research methods and a structural set of guidelines or activities in the research methodology. To my view, and this is my view, this is pretty much the same. A sequence of operations is a structured set of activities. All right, that's a sequence of operations, and to assist in generating valid and reliable results, which is that the same thing that tells you the research methods. So for the purposes of this, and what I suggest you to do as well, is that take the methodology or method in this context exactly in the same way. So there's not much difference, but what we're going to see as a definition is a defined sequence of operations. So a method or methodology will have that defined sequence of operations. As I said before, for the purposes of understanding each other and not to get confused between methods and methodologies, we will take one definition for both of them. And the definition I decided to take in this case, which is my decision, is the definition of method used by Mingers, which is a well-defined sequence of operations that, if carried out proficiently, yield predictable results. So we have some examples of methodologies or methods available, the ones you can see on your screen at the moment, but let's analyze one of those ones, which is the soft system methodology, into more detail. All right. So as you can see now in your screen, you see that the SSM, in this case, SSM can be seen in many different ways depending on the author, because there are many authors doing this kind of method, using this kind of methodology. But in this case, we have 7 steps. You can see the first step, which is entering the problem situation, and we move until the final step, which is taking action to improve the real world situation. What is important for you to notice is that we do have the defined sequence of activities, or the sequence of steps, to finish with a result that is the one we want to have. So we have 7 steps in this case, and if we follow those 7 steps, the people who wants and who is supporting of this methodology, we will be able to understand the phenomena we're trying to understand. in this case. So this is what is important for you to notice. A second thing that you need to notice is that even though we have 7 stages that look linear, many times there are iterations between different steps. For example, entering the problem situation and expressing the problem situation could be a loop between these two to really understand what is happening. So then, even though we put it linear, in reality, when we apply this methodology in reality, might not be that linear. Okay, so let's take a second example of another methodology that we use in information systems domain. The second example we see here is the so-called action research methodology or method. Right? As we can see, well, now we have a graphical representation of this method, but you can clearly see the steps or the stages that we refer to as a methodology. That makes it a methodology. We have planning, action, and result stages, right? So that's clearly things. So then we have those within our definition. We also can see that in this case, it's clearly that this is not a linear process because we have feedback loops from planning action. We can go back from action, we can go to planning. From results, we can go to action, and from results, we can go to planning as well. So there is feedback loops there, so then that specifies that it's not linear. So as you can see, methods and methodologies can be linear, can be recursive, can be iterative, and it depends on the ones we have. Another thing that is important to look at is that within those phases, we have different steps to follow as well. So then have sub-steps, like for example, in the planning phase, we have the preliminary diagnosis, then we have data gathering, for the other step, feedback of results, and action planning. So that's also valid that stages can have sub-stages. So what is the message I want you to get from this is that, one, that if you select a method or methodology, you have to be sure that it's the case when you have different steps, different stages. And second, if you tell your supervisor that you're using this, again, you need to follow that. If you said that you're also using action research, your supervisor will expect to see these kind of stages, like the planning, action, and result stages. And how did you carry out when you did your actual research? So that's the important thing here, that we need to apply this recipe, because that's what it is. Research methods can be seen as recipes. So when we apply this recipe into our own project, and our own project will have to have a planning stage, an action stage, and a result stage. Okay, we have seen that we have these research methods or research methodologies, which are the list of steps that we need to follow to complete a project, because at the end of the day, the research is a project. However, in each of those steps or stages we have in our methods or methodologies, we will need to collect some data at some stages. And that's when we have the techniques come into place. We can call them techniques, or data gathering techniques, research techniques, or data gathering techniques, and some people refer them also to some of them as research methods. For example, we have the surveys, and the surveys is just the process of applying a questionnaire. So it's the process of creating the questionnaire, so designing the questionnaire, then applying the questionnaire to our audience, and then analyzing the results with the statistical data. Because we have different steps in the survey, people consider that as a method, but not necessarily could be a research method. So then, to my view, this is a technique that we can use at different stages in different methods. For example, if we're using action research, and our first stage of the action research, we can use a survey to collect information. A survey is considered to be very to belong to the scientific paradigm because we use statistical data to analyze. We can have also document sampling, that we can analyze the documents of an organization, that we need to be looking at some details to understand how the things happen. We can look at diagrams, processes, any kind of document that we're looking at. And again, the way we analyze the document, it could be in a statistical way, or it could be in a qualitative way, both ways. We have interviews, where we can have interviews which are structured or semi-structured interviews, and also those interviews are to get more in-depth information of the phenomena we're studying. So they are more related interviews with qualitative approaches. The same thing, or very similar to that, is focus groups, in which we don't have a one-to-one interview, but we have conversation with a group in the focus groups, and also can be considered qualitative because it's more to get in-depth information. And we can do experiments of all kind of type depending on what is your research. So as you can see, the techniques here, we have them, are going to help us in the whole process of doing our research. And the whole process is guided by the research method or methodology we have on place, or we have selected to do so. Well, that was it. As a mode of summary, to summarize what we said, we saw concepts of paradigms. What are paradigms? The different paradigms we have in information system domain, and we saw what do they mean. Then we also revised that we have some methods, and those methods can be positioned in different paradigms, in one or the other one, or can use a combination of the two. So then the methods are the ones that are going to guide our research, right? So, and because guide our research are a series of steps normally that if we carry out in the determined order, then it will produce the results that we want. To help us in the methods, within the methods, we can use techniques, something that we call techniques, like surveys or interviews or focus groups I've saw before. So then the whole lot is what we call the research methodology, and that's what we ask you to do when you have your dissertation projects. Now the question that follows is, which are those methods that I have in the information domain? What are the most common ones, and how can I use them into my own research? How can I do this bit? And that's a new video that we'll present you. There is another video in which we will explain how can you model, how can you work with different models to have your research process in a way that you can understand, and that you can try to plan about how you're going to do your research. So we're introducing a modeling technique to model the research process, and that's another video. And to do so as well, you need to choose your topics, you need to be able to understand what you want to do, to have an idea what is the problem you want to tackle. So then we have another video as well that explains a bit about how do you go about doing research, how do you go about choosing your topics. Finally, as I told you at the beginning, when we talk about research, when we talk about these philosophical issues, there are always room for interpretation. So in order to not to present any bias, because what I presented here is pretty much my own interpretation of what I read and what I believe is this domain. So for you to see where I get this information, at this moment we're presenting the screen the reference that I use, the papers and documents and books that I use to come up with this solution. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed and hope it's useful for you, and keep in touch with us and take a look at the further videos if you want to continue working in this domain of research. Thank you very much, and see you next time.